Starting today, showing the videos on YouTube, the lists that go with this Molasses Moon series I've been featuring. This shows the latest one that I've uploaded, latest three, number 60, 59, 58, and then we go down to 57 and 56. And today, of course, will be 61, and then backing this up so you can see it better. This is my Kindle Fire. I'll set it up here so it can be part of the presentation for a while. I'm not sure which side to put this on. Maybe I'll just pull around a little bit like I usually do with my Kindle Fire. This shows the stand. Trying to get the text to show better. Let's see what I might do here. Move it over that way a little. Yeah, it's not going to show. Okay, I'm not fooling around with that. Anyway, if I do this way, you'll know that that's my Kindle Fire. And give us something to look at besides just this rambling, sidetracking head frame. Today, I was thinking what I might do is give a little bit of an astrological update type thing. Although it's going to start from an update of the lunar phase and then give some tips on the 8 lunar phases I usually watch, and I might relate them to processes like editing. We'll see how it works out. I'll start with the phase that we're in now, which is one of the best phases if you want to edit a book and just get, or anything that you want to get down to the bare bones basic skeleton, the basic integrity. When you want to get rid of things that don't belong, separate the wheat from the chaff type of thing. It's actually the 8th phase right before we get to the new moon. It's the darkest phase of the moon. And of course the darkest point is right the end of the balsamic phase right before the new moon starts. And the balsamic phase is the last of the decreasing moon phase, where it's decreasing in light. And then when you start with the new moon, phase number 1, following phase number 8, number 8 being the balsamic, number 1 being the new. And as soon as you cross from balsamic to moon, new moon, you're starting the waning cycle again, or the growth cycle. And generally then you have 4 phases that are decreasing or waning phases. I might have said that wrong. I think I did. The increasing are the waxing phases. So the new moon starts the waxing phase. The balsamic moon finishes the waning phase, which is growing darker and darker. So the darkest of the moon is right at the end of the 8th balsamic phase. Generally, things that you want to increase or make grow, you initiate or work with during the growing or the waxing phases that follow the new moon, the first 4. And then the things that you want to decrease or get rid of, like pulling weeds or just get rid of toxins or decide what to cut from something to let it remain in its most pure form, which would be the type of editing which is done most frequently, because it seems like writers tend to, in general, and myself certainly included, add more rather than less in the way of words or anything else. That's, though, when I think about it, that's from writers that are well seasoned or that write full time. You just get into where you love words and love your own self-expression and love finding different ways to say things, and sometimes you'll include more than one way when really one would be enough. So the balsamic moon phase is good, very good for editing in most cases. Now, new writers or people when they're first starting with writing often have a hard time adding and might write 3 or 4 sentences and that's all they can find to say. And that's usually because you just haven't learned to add the details that people might want to know. To quote the well-known journalism, the who, what, where, when, and how, if you're stuck, just ask yourself some of those questions that a person might want to know who isn't you reading what you're writing. Sometimes it's hard to get in that frame of mind, but that might work better in the lunar phase that I have in my chart. It's the phase ruled by Jupiter. I'll have to go with these in order. It's the growing or the waxing phase that comes right before the called the gibbous phase, which is the last 4 days of the increasing phase. I've got my Kindle going. Actually, you probably could have seen it better when it was not as bright. But I'm sure once you've seen it, that's enough. Looks like it's wanting to go smaller, or where did it go? I'm not sure. Let's see. Go back to. I don't know what it's doing. Push the home button. So there you get my carousel, and that's where we were. Let's see. I'm going to push where it says web. It's one of these top lists here. And that'll take you to where we were last, which I don't want. I'm going to push the little plus sign. There you go. I wanted to get all the different, the history of the websites I've been on. And that way, usually I just click one of those where I've been. And one of the ones I use most frequently. I was going to put my Facebook page on here. Let's see if I can find it. Usually that's one of my main ones. Mostly I've got my videos here. Okay, I shouldn't be wasting time on this. But I'll just put this one. This is the buying page for The Rose in the Pyramid. Myrtle's Ultimate Mystery. You can't see that very well. I'm just going to go back to home. And since we're in the Molasses Moon series here, and I worked with my editing, I think I'll put that one on. Okay. Alrighty, now getting back to the moon phases. Let's see. I don't know what I'm doing here. Probably trying to use a prop when I should just be forgetting about it. But you can probably tell I'm addicted to my Kindle Fire and all my other Kindles. I have one of each except for the DX and the Kindle Touch electronic ink. That might be one I'd buy next. Anyway, getting to my moon phase, Jupiter, that is the most expansive of the moon phases. But to put this in perspective here, that's one of the reasons I've had a hard time with repetition and padding and adding more when maybe I should cut things out. But in a way, that I would be willing to bet that that is what Hemingway's moon phase was. It's actually the third, I think. Let me go through these and I'll get them right. The first moon phase, of course, is the new moon. That's number 1 phase. It's the number 1 of the waxing or growing phases. Each one of these phases are 4 days, 3.5, between 3 and 4, since you have 29 days in the lunar cycle. So you've got the first one, the new moon, is ruled by the sun, because the sun is the most creative. It's fire, of course, ruled by Leo in natural systems. And so Leo is a fixed fire sign. The sun represents then fixed fire. That's like the phase for planting seeds or concepts. Conception type phases. But the sun ruling that phase of right after the new moon is hot and dry. So it's not always the best time to plant seeds. Often the best planting phase might be the second. The second phase of 3.5 to 4 days is ruled by the moon. And I'm trying to remember if that's the... Oh, this is kind of ridiculous. I just go by the planet or the sun or the moon that rules the phase, because that tells me more about it. So it's the second in the growing phases, ruled by the moon itself. So it's the most, what would you call it, pregnant of all the phases, with the most potential for growth, especially for organic things, since the moon deals with organic living organisms, emotions, sensitivity, bonding, nurturing. Okay, so that's the second one. The third of the 8 lunar phases is ruled by, I think that's Venus. Yeah. Venus, which is the disseminating phase. It's still a growing lunar phase, but dissemination sort of means beginning to sort out. Let's see. Oh, I might have got this mixed up here. And I don't want to have to start over, so how can I pull myself out of this mess? As I go through, I'll see whether I have number 3 right as Venus or not. Not. Yep, okay, good. I'm glad I caught that. The third phase actually is ruled by Jupiter. That's mine. It's my phase. That's the most expansive or the strongest push for growth. Is the third lunar phase in the waxing, growing toward increasing in light, going toward the full moon. So that's one where if you have that one like I do and you're a writer, then you might look forward to the balsamic moon phases, because that's when it will be a lot easier for you to cut back the fat. I mean, Jupiter will deal with luxury, indulgence, and fat, abundance, the cornucopia. That would probably be called a cornucopia phase, since that's just when things are surging in growth. You've got them planted and nurtured by the moon, and then they're just really going great guns, probably in stride, in the Jupiter third phase in 8. Then in the fourth phase, it's called the Gibbous moon. That one's ruled by Saturn, and that Saturn puts the brakes on anything. Saturn controls. It's the organization, the bare bone structure, the outline, the order. It rules Capricorn. That would be the ultimate in the left brain type of procedures. So if you're born during the Saturn moon phase or the Gibbous moon, where the moon is still growing on its last of the growth cycles before it'll starts waning or decreasing at the full moon phase. So as soon as the moon is full, right after that is when the moon's going to start decreasing in light again. So the Saturn-ruled Gibbous moon, when the brakes are starting to be put on, so that the phase can change from the growing to the decreasing. That one, I guess just anything that Saturn or Capricorn is known for would be what you do most during that phase. That seems to be also the phase when crises come to a head. And people that are born during that phase usually have a lot going on in their lives, and their lives are just packed. And the full moon phase, they call it, but it's actually, I think, more the Gibbous moon than the full moon. But it will still carry into the full moon phase when it starts decreasing. That's when the emergency rooms are packed. And when any nurse or doctor that works in an emergency room will tell you that that's when they prepare for the most incoming catastrophes, whatever you want to call them. Okay, so then when you start the decreasing, the fifth phase would be the full moon, and that one's ruled by Mercury. Mercury, the planet of communication, of trying to start making sense out of what you have. It's when you start sorting things out and identifying or communicating what they are, learning, teaching, pulling together the details and looking at them, maybe itemizing them. It sounds more like a Saturn organizational thing, but it's also related to Mercury, which rules Gemini. So that's the full moon, when it first starts decreasing or waning. So the sixth phase after the Mercury phase, that's the one ruled by Venus. Yeah, I can kind of keep those straight because it's almost opposite to the Jupiter phase. Venus is the dissemination phase, and that is when things are, well, just disseminated, sorted out. When you decide, in a way, separate things into what you might want to keep and what you might want to get rid of, or what you might want to keep or give away. And everything related to Venus would relate to that phase. Then after the Venus phase is one of the more interesting ones, the seventh of 8 lunar phases. That one's ruled by the planet Uranus. And actually I call it the breakdown or breakthrough phase. This is my terminology. I think I've got my Kindle turned into a mirror. So I think I'll just go ahead and put it down here. And just be regular again. Turn my shift to focus a little bit. Get myself comfortable. So now we're in the 7th phase. That one's fascinating to me because there is where you break bonds of things. You've separated what you want to keep and what you might want to throw away or give away in the disseminating phase. And now what you're going to try to do is break any bonds between things that you might want to get rid of. So even if there's some toxins in your body, the body actually follows these moon phases. And if medical people understood this, they might be able to work with them a little bit better. So the things that you're wanting to get rid of will be broken down during these 3 to 4 days. You might even notice that when you're stirring foods or cooking, that they'll break down or break apart and get mushy a lot easier during this Uranus-ruled moon phase of the decreasing, the 4 phases of decreasing. Things just break down, don't hang together. They're supposed to be dissolving, the dissolution phase. So when you want to do those things, it's really an interesting, very helpful phase. If you want to, say, hit something at the right point to break it or make it shatter, or to break apart, if you've got say, a diamond cutter, precious stone, that you want to just hit at the right point and have the bonds or the angles break free much more easily, that would be the Uranian phase, the 7th. I'm beginning to wonder now, I hadn't really thought about this, but if diamond cutters or jewelers might, especially the cutters might more frequently be born during the Uranian 7th lunar phase. That's also a good phase for breaking habits, beginning the process of breaking yourself away from something or an addiction that you want to get rid of. Start breaking it down during the Uranian phase. And then when you get to the Balsamic phase, the planet ruling that is Mars. And Mars is an interesting planet. It rules the sign of Aries. But it goes either way. It's the planet Mars and Aries that sparks something to start it growing. Aries is the first sign in the zodiac, would be the beginning first phase, similar to beginning the growing phase of the moon. So Mars sparks or initiates something. It gives that energy to start up, or to start momentum even. The startup or the spark is from Mars and Aries. So Mars plays that role, but when Mars is ruling the Balsamic phase, or the 8th phase, I wonder if I called it 7 before. Well, we know there are 8, and for sure Uranian's the 7th phase. And the Balsamic phase is definitely 8, ruled by Mars. And Mars is also rules swords and knives. And it's very appropriate because the Balsamic is when you want to cut away the fat, cut away the dead wood. Just separate the wheat from the chaff for sure. And I had already started with that phase. But think of the knives and all the things that they might do with an expert with them. Maybe a culinary chef that is really good with a collection of knives, and most chefs, I think, that's a prime part of their abilities and their profession. So possibly chefs might actually have a Balsamic phase too, because that's also the flavor phase in a sense. Balsamic vinegar. When you think of balsamic flavors, they're very intense and pronounced. Now, in some ways, chefs want to do things more subtle to blend them well, but when you want a flavor to stand out, then you need to know the balsamics of it. Essential oils would fit with the balsamic phase because you don't break down, you distill the plant that the oil is made from down to its basic, most condensed and intensified form. So anyway, I learned about these 8 phases which rule by different planets. And when you understand what the planets mean and do and what signs they relate to, you can even add more detail to your understanding of how to work with the 8 moon phases. There was one astrology class that I took in Portland, Oregon when I was studying, being in my initial reconnecting is what it was with astrological phenomenon in this lifetime. What I found is that I already knew how to write the glyphs, and I'd never written them before or even paid much attention to them before I started studying astrology. My hand, even when I write them, it just flows. It can write glyphs, astrological glyphs, more easily and naturally than I've ever been able to write the Roman alphabet. The numbers are next easy for me after the glyphs, astrological planets and signs. So the class was taught by, trying to think of her name. It was something that she learned somewhere else too, and I asked her where she had learned this use of 8 phases and attributed each one to a planet rulership. She didn't remember who had originated this concept, but honestly, this use of 8 lunar phases, relating them each to the planet I've just mentioned and the functions I've just mentioned, was probably the most helpful and accurate astrological class I'd ever taken. It's probably the part of astrology I use the most, which would make sense in one way since the moon in my chart is the most pronounced part of it. So I would have a natural affinity for lunar phases. So this would relate to Molasses Moon, of course, and the mood news column I mentioned in there. And just relates to editing for writers. Look at my time here, 6:17 p.m. and the date, March 19th, 2012, Monday, Moon Day. That's interesting. I haven't planned it that way. I don't plan very many things. I'm a very spontaneous person for many reasons. And a lot of them I've already talked about in all these videos and in Molasses Moon. Yeah, I think that's probably enough. Seemed like oh yeah, I did want to mention that in my Facebook page, of course, I've been including hyperlinks to all these videos and sometimes have a few more comments there. Of course, there aren't very many at all here on the YouTube channel, but there are quite a few on my Facebook page of where I discussed a little bit in more detail using the balsamic phase for editing and what I talked about in my previous videos. I think it was 59, where I went into the Jack Engelhard giving me the Hemingway technique for cutting away, then nodding your head or just nodding. So anyway, hope I didn't put anybody to sleep. I probably should write some of this down, but I'm not sure I really am going to do that in the introduction or not. It takes a lot of time. Sometimes I'm lazy, especially when I'm doing something like this that I'm not charging for. But it's given me a lot of benefit. It's well worth my time as far as I'm concerned. And I think this one for sure at least should be of benefit to a few people anyway. So with that, I'm having a hard time with the closing. That's amazing. Well, maybe I'll say one more thing that came to mind. The other thing you can do with this balsamic moon phase is if you're trying to name something that will really identify what it is, Like there was a business that I was going to start that had a kitchen supply store. And I had a big, long list of different names, and I really was agonizing over them, and I just couldn't pick one. And just by accident, I hadn't seen yet, or just hadn't made the connections of the balsamic moon phase being the best time to identify, narrow down, isolate the essence of something. So it was like just all of a sudden I looked through the list, and I'm not even sure it was on there, but I named it City Chef. And at that balsamic moon phase, there was just no doubt. That was the name. That was it. It's what I wanted. But I couldn't see it until that phase of the moon came about. So that too, using it for naming something, isolating the essence, the flavor. Trying to think of something I might be able to do that with. Or nutshell something. But that's enough. Next time.